our waterfowl discussion and water birds. We talked about Waterfowl 101 a couple of weeks ago. We covered ducks, geese, and swans. And as I was going through the presentation that day, I realized there are just so many more birds that use the water as the main part of their habitat. And I wanted to talk about a lot of those birds that are included in that kind of subjective group of water birds. So like I said, a lot of birds use the water as their habitat. So we'll talk about what kind of habitat that might look like, some parts of their habitat that might be threatened, and then get you guys engaged in identifying some birds. So we're using Zoom again today. By now, I'm sure a lot of you have Zoomed before, but if not, there's just a couple things that I want to point out. So at the bottom of your screen, if you hover your mouse around a little bit, you'll see the chat button. So you'll want to make sure and click that at some point, and it should dock the chat to the right of your screen, and you'll still be able to see our presentation. So when you're typing into the chat and engaging with us, make sure that you type to everyone. So if you click everyone, it'll pop up with all of the participants in our Zoom today. If you wanted to chat just to our handy guy behind the scenes today, the guy behind the curtain, that's Tyler. And if you had just a question for just him or just me, you could type it to either one of us. But if you want to share that with everyone, just make sure it says to everyone. So my name is Chaley Jensen. I am the Nebraska Wildlife Education Coordinator with Bird Conservancy, and I'm based out of the Bird Conservancy Education Office in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. That's about 3 hours northeast of Denver, and I work in conjunction with Nebraska Game and Parks. Most of my programs are paid for by the Nebraska Environmental Trust, which is almost entirely lottery fundraiser money. So joining me in the chat window I mentioned is Tyler Cash, and he is a Bird Conservancy educator based in Brighton, Colorado. So if you have any questions, please type them to us and we will be happy to answer them for you, or if you just have things that you want to share. So a little bit about Bird Conservancy. We're headquartered in Brighton, Colorado, and we have folks working with us in Canada, many of the central and western states, and Mexico. So we use a three-pronged approach of education, where we belong, science, and land stewardship all coming together in our mission of conserving birds by connecting birds, people, and land. So I'll start out the same way I do for most programs, by getting to know you all a little bit better. Because this webinar is open to anyone, anywhere, if you could please do the following. Just type in the chat window where you're Zooming from, what's your favorite bird today, and how many people are watching this webinar with you. So I'll give you some time to chat those in, and you can look at some examples of some birds that we'll be exploring today. Hi, Paula. Hi, Lynn. That's my grandma's name, spelled the exact same way. Hi, Sue. Hi, Julie. Hi, Josh. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Christine. Hey, Jessica. I love seeing what your favorite birds are. Great to see you all. Hi, Charlotte. Hi, Cynthia. Hi, Greg. So in today's webinar, we will be exploring what makes this group of birds unique. So like I said before, this is meant to go beyond just ducks and geese to other groups of aquatic birds that are not game species. So it might be helpful to have a field guide handy, as these might be unknown birds to many of us. This is a good chance to practice spotting some birds that you might be lucky to see just once per year. This will not be a comprehensive list as there are hundreds of species that we could cover, but today we'll talk about these non-passerine water birds and hopefully answer what questions you may have about them. If you attended Waterfowl 101 a couple weeks ago or any of our other birding webinars in the last couple months, you may have learned about passerines, raptors, waterfowl, and many more birds, corvids. I'll remind you that all of those webinars are available on our YouTube page, our YouTube channel, which is just Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. So all of these are recorded and put on our YouTube channel for anybody to watch at any time. Today's focus is the non-passerine aquatic birds that are not ducks, geese, swans, or grebes. So this leaves a lot of birds that use aquatic habitats, and most of them nest in colonies. So some of these birds fit into a subjective group called the colonial nesting water birds, a tongue twister of a name that just means that they tend to gather in large groups called colonies during their nesting season. And most of the birds we'll talk about today obtain all or most of their food from the water, typically fish and aquatic invertebrates. Our colonial nesting water birds can be further divided into two major groups depending on where they feed. So first is the seabirds, which feed primarily in salt water. Some seabirds, such as the Franklin's gull pictured on the top, spends a lot of its life at sea, returning only to land to nest. A few species, including cormorants, gulls, terns, and pelicans, can occupy freshwater habitats, but they're still considered seabirds. The second group of our colonial nesting water birds is our wading birds, and they'll seek their prey in fresh or brackish waters. Brackish meaning a body of water that is slightly salty, usually from the mixing of river water and seawater. The name wading bird accurately implies that they feed by wading or standing still in the water, including birds such as our bitterns, herons, egrets, ibises. Here's our glossy ibis on the picture on the second picture below. Spoonbills and storks. All right, the third classification of aquatic birds are our shorebirds. So they belong to the diverse order Charadriiformes. They are going to live in coastal or saline, freshwater wetlands, agriculture fields, grasslands, and even Arctic tundra habitats. So they have a wide variety of habitats, and this is a very diverse group of birds, but they usually have small bodies and long, thin legs for wading. And the birds in this group are going to include our oyster catchers, our stilts, avocets, plovers, sandpipers, curlews, and others. So that's a huge group of birds. Lastly, our loons and our divers. So the bottom picture there is one of our loons. Depending on where you live in North America, common loons are, well, the most common birds that you're going to see in this group. So pictured here is actually a red-throated loon. They have a much more limited range than our common loon. And there are 5 extant or living loon species in North America. They belong to the order Gaviiformes. So these birds look a lot like ducks, and a lot of people might put them in that group as well, but they have solid bones. So unlike most other birds who have hollow bones, loons have solid bones that really help them in diving. So they can dive deep into the water and get a lot of their prey, which is mostly fish, that way. So the birds we're learning about today belong in different families and different orders, but the one thing they have in common is the need for water in their habitat. Speaking of habitat, in the chat, I would love for you to type in some places you think these birds would live. So I see there's 4 examples here. You can certainly type those in, but think about what other places our water birds are going to live. Maybe you think of a specific habitat or a place like a park, an ocean that you have visited where you've seen these types of birds. Lakes, of course, reservoirs, ponds. Yeah, so some natural features and some human-made features. Doesn't have to just be things that are purely natural. Bird refuges, good example. Yes, some of them take up places we don't really like, but where there's a lot of food and resources for them. Definitely. So these are great examples. In this slide here, we see four pretty different types of habitat. There's a saltwater or freshwater marsh. That's going to be great habitat for many wading birds. So our large-bodied, tall birds that are going to stand still in the water, kind of fishing for prey, but where there's also taller grasses that they can hide a little bit easier. The cliffs on the right help hide birds like our puffins and give them a great vantage point for fishing the waters below. In the Arctic refuge, where some of these birds live, almost as far north as you can go, you'll encounter a lot of this type of habitat that's quite devoid of life in the winters, but that makes it good for nesting. You know, lots of hiding places in those rocks that isn't going to change throughout with the seasons. Open ocean is important for a lot of our aquatic birds, like our Arctic tern. The Arctic tern travels around 25,000 miles annually in their migration journey, and much of that is over open ocean. So open ocean is clearly a big part of this the habitat for the Arctic tern. And agriculture fields. So whether these are flooded or dry, these can be ideal habitat for birds like mountain plover, which we'll talk about later, and other shorebirds that can hide amongst the shrub and the rock. So something low to the ground can actually be pretty good habitat for a lot of these birds. So I want to ask, knowing about all these different habitat types, looking through the chat box and seeing what habitats other people have suggested, how do you think these habitats are threatened? So brainstorm that for a little bit. If you have someone with you, brainstorm for a little bit how you think these habitats might be threatened currently in the world that we currently live in. And go ahead and type that into the chat when you're ready. So remember that many of these birds can occupy huge stretches of land during their lifetimes. Good habitat is key to a long life for these animals. I agree with all these suggestions so far. Yep. So there are a lot of threats to these habitats. I think you guys all gave really awesome suggestions. So marshes are threatened by so many things. Rising sea level, they are under threat of pollution, overuse, development, and all of this leads to habitat degradation. But we can basically apply all of those things to each of these habitats. So when you add pollution, overuse, climate change, overfishing, you know, habitat degradation is one of those things that follows. So one of the missions and the main goal of Bird Conservancy is to conserve these lands and make it known that these birds definitely require unique habitat, varied habitat. And so these are the birds that you see can be very sensitive to change. Many birds are indicators of what's going on in a habitat, and a lot of the birds that we're talking about today are the same way. So let's talk a bit about how these birds nest. We'll talk about 3 different nesting behaviors, and this won't cover the whole group, but it'll give you an idea of where some of these birds are going to be finding home and sleeping at night, protecting their young, that kind of thing. Water birds are going to nest where they can, depending on where they are in the world. And for our tufted puffin, pictured here, one of the cutest birds ever, they're a seabird who lives on the coast of Alaska and British Columbia. they typically nest on cliffs, like I mentioned earlier. So they dive at fish and bring them back to their nests. They're going to spend winters far away from shore in the Pacific Ocean. So they're going to leave their nesting ground and use what they can to find habitat during the cold winters. Below is our great blue heron. This is a white form, a favorite wading bird of many. They nest high in the trees in bulky stick nests. So birds this big and quite slow need somewhere covered and inaccessible to predators when they're nesting. If you're looking for this bird, if it is at nighttime, I would look up high. But if it's during the daytime, these are one of the birds that you may see the most often occupying those marshes, just because they're so big and easy to spot. If you spook it, it's going to probably fly pretty low to the water or the marsh and give you a great view of it throughout. And then on the right, the American Avocet nests on the ground. This is a shorebird, and in areas of shallow wetlands, they're going to find their nests. They often place them directly on the ground without shrubs for shade or anything. So they just nest in open ground. I learned in preparing this that after their eggs hatch, the babies will leave the nest within 1 day, and they'll be ready to dive and swim and walk just within that 1 day. So the babies don't need too much nesting time after they hatch. Oh, I'm also curious if anybody's seen a puffin in the wild. I haven't either. That's one of the main birds I want to see. So I mentioned earlier that our Arctic terns have a really, really incredible migration journey. It's around 25,000 miles in a year for their full journey, and pictured on the left is an example of the way they travel. So in the yellow is showing their migration south, and where they loop around is the orange, traveling back north, and where they'll encounter a little bit of North America that way. It's pretty fantastic. They can even sleep while they're flying. They will take a lot of breaks along the shorelines when that's accessible to them. But what's so interesting is that not all birds exhibit this behavior. It's very, very taxing on a body, and Arctic terns are very small birds, but this works for them. So I want you to think about why a bird would migrate in this manner when it's such a physically taxing journey. So do another little brainstorm, chat in your thoughts, and I'll let you know there is no one right answer. So what do you think could be the benefits of traveling such a long journey over such an inhabitable habitat as the open ocean? Wind patterns, summer all year round, good ideas. I'll wait just a couple more seconds to let anybody else type in their thoughts. These all seem pretty correct to me. So what I found when I was kind of looking for an answer to that question is following the summer sun and enjoying summer all year round. Now, if that's true, that would mean that they are taking advantage of the food sources that would bring throughout the year. If you imagine following the curve of the earth and following the seasons throughout the whole year, if you follow that warm season, you're going to have plants and bugs and all of the aquatic macroinvertebrates they're trying to eat all year long. Now, this bird is extremely, it can be threatened very easily by pollution and by disturbance of its habitat. So they look to, especially to these Arctic terns, as like a canary in a coal mine, to use that phrase. When they're not migrating, they do nest on the ground in huge colonies right on the shore, which might be a great opportunity for seeing them. Otherwise, it might be on a whale watching trip or something similar to that, which we'll talk about here. So with a field guide handy, you can easily find out what birds are accessible to you throughout the year. So I personally live in Western Nebraska, part of the Central Flyway, and I see pelicans, I see cormorants, I see lots of things, but I would have to travel to either coast if I was going to try to see a lot of the birds that we're talking about today. I would consider a bird watching trip, a serious bird watching trip. So North American Pelagic Tours take visitors to wildlife hotspots. So whether it's a whale watching tour or a puffin watching tour, what other kinds of tours that they even offer, you'll likely get some life listers out of it, but it definitely could require some travel to see some of these birds. So in a little bit, we'll do my favorite part of these webinars, which is our little ID quiz. So we'll talk about, I want to talk a little bit about how we identify some of these birds. Obviously, what it looks like is going to help you from the picture I'm going to give you. But if we were outdoors right now, we saw a bird and we didn't know what family it belonged to. We didn't know it was part of the waterfowl or water bird group. We would want to look at its behavior. So think about what the birds we're talking about today do with their life. A lot of them migrate very long distances. They eat food that comes straight out of the water. So think about how they're going to act in the water. Like our great blue heron on the bottom, they're huge birds and they're going to stand very still in the water waiting for fish to come right up to them, and then they might take off right away. So that could give you a clue to what bird that might be. Also think about habitat. So like I said, the puffins, you know that you're not going to see them in Colorado or Nebraska. So we should probably cross those off the list of choices. Think about their noticeable colors and patterns, their size, and are they alone? Are they in a pair? Are they in a large group or colony? So we'll think about all those things when we're actually viewing them outside as well. Remember that our field guides are so handy. You might have a hard copy right in front of you, or you might have an app. You might have a handy website that you can type in and find some of these birds easily. And when you're looking at your bird guides, remember that those range maps are hugely helpful. So they're usually color-coded depending on if the bird is breeding, where it spends its time year-round if it does that, and where it's non-breeding, or it might have a good migration map for you. This is for the American goldfinch, and this is very important when we're looking at who we might be looking at, depending on where we are at that time. Remember that they're not always, the birds don't have the field guide, so they always could be a little bit off, but these are pretty good to follow. All right, in a second, I'll show you the first picture. And if this is your first time doing one of these webinars, welcome, I'm glad you're here. And I want you to try to narrow down the group of birds that you think it belongs to. So based on what we've talked about today, is in its habitat, what is it doing? How could that help us narrow down the group? Is it small? Is it large? Does it have long legs or short legs? Does it look like it's a great flyer, but not a good waiter? Think about if it might be male or female and how you can tell. And if you know it right away, I think that's awesome. You can chat it to me or Tyler if you know it right away, but I'd love to give others a chance to look it up in their bird guide before too much is spoiled. And if you don't want it spoiled, maybe hide the chat or just don't look at it while you're looking up the bird. All right, first one. So this bird has a range throughout the United States and southern Canada. They are colony nesters, so they can be found in large groups, spreading their wings out to dry or diving to catch fish. I'll show a picture of a little closer up. Maybe that will help. Yeah, Tyler brings up a good point. Remember, if you're guessing, you are still learning, so take your best guess. When I was in ornithology junior year of college, during our final exam, we went out into the field to identify as many birds as possible, and it was April, so lots of options in eastern Nebraska. This bird I missed, and it was one of the birds I missed on my exam, and I think I'll always remember the name now. Because I was like, I don't remember you ever telling us we needed to know this weird looking bird. But we've got a lot of right answers. It's the Doublecrested Cormorant. When I lived in Denver, one of my favorite places to see these birds was at the zoo. They have like an island of cormorants over there, and there was just hundreds of them, it seemed. All right, bird number 2. So this bird has a range throughout the United States and Canada. They're commonly thought of as ducks, but they have solid bones. Their eerie calls can also be heard echoing across the water, depending on where you are. I've seen a lot of these in Minnesota, and it's their state bird. Here's a closer up picture. We have a lot of right answers. So I'll show the name. That's our common loon. Very good. That was one of our easier ones. All right, number 3. This bird here ranges across the central and western United States. They will probe the ground with their unique bill, looking for small insects and aquatic invertebrates to eat. The bill shape is an important field mark. I'll show another picture. During breeding, they don a beautiful orange plumage, seen here. So this bird does have long legs for wading, but a smaller body, and it belongs to the order Charadriiformes, which we'll remember is our group of shorebirds. Their family is Recurvorostridae. I hope I'm saying that right. When I was taking ornithology, that is how I remembered, is that unique bill shape, how it turns up at the end, and their family is Recurvorostridae with the word curve. That was pretty helpful for me. But this is our American Avocet. Gorgeous, gorgeous bird, especially with that breeding plumage. Okay, number 4. This bird can be found in saltwater or freshwater meadows. It does not range throughout the United States, actually just on the coast of Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. It might look like another bird, but notice the bill. And also think about how they eat with a bill like that, what they eat. Here's a close-up picture. And if you're familiar with what a flamingo looks like, their bills are much different, have a much different shape. it curves down a lot. But this is our Roseate Spoonbill, and they're that color for a similar reason that flamingos have a bright pink color. It comes from the foods that they eat, which contain carotenoids. So this is like small crustaceans, shrimps, crabs, and other aquatic invertebrates. So if they didn't eat those kinds of foods, they would not be pink. But it is beautiful. All right, number 5. I hope to make it a little tougher today by including some pictures a little bit far away, but that includes a habitat, so it can help you discern maybe what group that bird belongs to. This bird is most likely to be found in the US during migration season, but they fly very fast and they don't like to stay in one spot for too long. So they'll nest in freshwater marshes, pictured here, and loose colonies, and they have huge, great ability catching fish or insects in their habitats. Now I'll show you another picture. This one is tough. Do we think this is a shorebird, a wading bird, a seabird, or a loon? This is a tough one. Okay, we have 2 folks that guessed a tern of some sort. A couple more. It is a type of tern. Yep. I'll go back to the picture before if you need some more distinguishing field marks and pictures from another angle. We'll also remember that some birds are very tricky depending on what plumage they're in. So the 2 pictures I'm showing you are, I'm guessing, different times of year. So there's a lot of options in North America, but the one that occupies the largest range, and I did say that this was usually just during migration, is our black tern. So when the adult is breeding, they'll have that black head, and their body will get much more black as well. So they'll have more black on the front. Good job. That was tough. This bird is not imaginary. It can be found throughout the US and Mexico during non-breeding, and it will fly north to Canada for breeding seasons. They look a little stockier and plumper than other birds in this group, which can be attributed to its extra large pectoral or breast muscles that make up a quarter of their weight, helping them reach flight speeds up to 60 miles per hour. This is a widespread bird, but tricky to spot because of their buff coloring and their secretive nature. Here's another picture of this bird a little closer up. So it is kind of hard to tell from one photo the size of a bird. This is a pretty small bird. And it's smaller than its cousins, which would include our Avocet and other birds like that. I'm trying not to give the group away. And a really long, skinny bill. So it is a snipe. And I see a couple of correct answers, so I'll go ahead and give the name. This is our Wilson snipe. They're cute. They do have huge pectoral muscles for their flight speed. Okay, in a second, I'm going to go to the next screen, which is a bonus round. So there are 6 birds, all different, that we'll try to identify. So what I would suggest is maybe just try to identify all of them and then type in as many as you have gotten as you can. All right, go. I'll give it a couple of minutes for this round. Some of these are tricky. If there's any that are particularly challenging, just let me know what number and we can give some hints. Number 5 is kind of uncommon, but it is widespread throughout North America. Ponds and streams, rocky shores, steep banks. This picture, number 5, is adult breeding plumage. Number 4 is a very odd looking bird that lives on the Pacific coast. It is not a grebe. Looks like a lot of people have gotten number 2. is a snowy egret. So that's a wading bird. Notice that large body, huge wings and long legs, curved neck. It is hard without size comparisons. A lot of right answers on number 6 as well. So that is a night heron, black-crowned night heron. I'll wait just a little bit longer for anybody else that's still looking. Anyone else need some hints? I have not seen a correct answer for number 4 yet. So number 4 is some type of seabird. Yep, Barbara got it. That's our Cassin's auklet. And they spend time on the whole Pacific coast of North America. They are very, very quiet at sea. Interesting. So I see a lot of correct answers. I'm going to go through and give you the names of them. What I wish in hindsight is that I'd put the names on the PowerPoint, but we can't go do that right now. So number 1 was lesser yellow legs. Good thing its legs are sticking out of the water, but again, it's one of those shore birds that has buff coloration. And if it's secretive, then it's very hard to see. And then you'll need to see its legs to see what it is. Very, very tough. Our snowy egret, number 2, not as difficult. Yep, it has those bright yellow feet and the yellow right near its eyes. And it's almost a pure white on its feathers. Number 3 is a little trickier. So that is a type of plover. It nests it nests in the high plains of the United States and migrates through parts of Canada and Mexico. And the good way to identify this shorebird is by looking at its eye. And you can see that basically drawn line of black from the tip of its bill to the end of its eye. So this is our mountain plover. And I included this one because it has a great conservation story and I really like them. Number 4 was our Cassin's auklet. So again, on the Pacific coast of the US and Canada and Mexico. Number 5 is the spotted sandpiper. Lastly, number 6 was the black-crowned night heron. Long name and tough to remember if it's black-capped, black-crowned, black-headed. Day heron? No, it's a night heron. Good job. So this is one of the last things I have to talk about today about waterfowl. I just get so excited about them, is our mountain plovers. So MOPL is a birder's abbreviation of a mountain plover. So they're a near threatened bird species that can be found in the high plains of the US. They are ground breeders. that prefer short grass prairie, especially those that are dug up by prairie dogs. So this is a little bit close to home conservation story for me in Western Nebraska. However, since their preferred short grass prairie habitat has been greatly reduced throughout the US, mountain plovers often breed in tilled fields or fields with short crops. So if this is a cornfield, soybean field, or just a open pasture, but they do like it to be tilled. In farm fields, mountain plover nests are nearly impossible to see. On the left, you can see a couple of chicks, which are beautifully camouflaged. And the nest basically just consists of a bunch of pebbles on the ground that the mom or dad has scraped together. So sticks and rocks, a loose scrape of rocks and sticks on the dirt. So they're very impossible to see. And with their babies being so well camouflaged, it's very easy for these birds to get killed if they are residing in a field. Therefore, they're often destroyed by farming equipment in the spring. So Bird Conservancy has long worked with landowners, ranchers, and farmers to prevent the destruction of their nests. And the solution is actually pretty simple and pretty interesting. So this often included placing colored flags or sticks, with spray painted orange near the nests. We would band the mountain plover residents and have farmers avoid just that one patch of their land. So if you can imagine a farmer driving a combine and he just has to lift it up around that one section and not disturb that nest. So in Nebraska and in parts of northern Colorado, this has shown success in improving their nest sites and not destroying so many nests. However, because they are near threatened and their numbers continue to dwindle due to habitat loss in other areas, their numbers are still far from what we would want to see. But just an interesting way that we have learned to work with people that own the land and coming up with simple solutions to protect these birds. So it's a pretty cool story. All right, so I want to give you a couple of tips in order to find some of these birds. During spring and fall migrations, many species of our aquatic birds are going to congregate in large groups on bodies of water throughout North America. So in my opinion, these seasons are the best time for viewing, but that's because I live in the Midwest. With a well-timed trip to Alaska or Texas or either coast, you might see hundreds of species of birds. Because I live in a landlocked state, I frequent lakes, creeks, and rivers when I'm hoping to see water birds, but you'll also want to use your resources. So if you use social media, especially Facebook, there are groups, pages, and birding meetups where you can connect with other birders and find out about events going on in your area. In Nebraska, my favorite group is Birds of Nebraska, which is on Facebook and helps show me where I should go if I'm looking for a particular bird, and it's very specific to my location. If you're interested in any of these resources I know of or things that I think that I could find, please let me know after this webinar and I can send you links and more resources. Perhaps you have a local Audubon chapter or an organization like Bird Conservancy that holds events for birders of all ages and levels. This can help you find spots in your area that you can revisit throughout the year. A lot of waterfowl and aquatic bird viewing can be done from your vehicle. So if land access is an issue or the birds keep flying away when you get nearby, you can stay in your vehicle and remain a little bit more hidden with a pair of binoculars or a spotting scope and gain a lot of ground quickly. Scopes are an awesome tool for viewing. A couple weeks ago, we broke down the basics of binoculars and our scopes are super similar. So that's a picture of a spotting scope right there. And they get set up just like a camera tripod so that you can keep focus on one area instead of having the shaky movement from your binoculars. I think early mornings and evenings tend to be the best time for viewing birds, but it helps to just be outside a lot. You see a lot without planning to, I might want to go see a puffin, so I go to where the puffins are, but still might not see a puffin. It just happens. So the closer you get to the birds, a lot of times the more likely that is they'll fly away from you. So it's best obviously to try to sneak up on them, remain hidden, If you know of a duck blind or a deer blind, that's also a great tool for keeping hidden from birds. All right, so I'm going to leave this last slide up for any other questions that you might have to type into the chat. So I'll stay on for a little bit, but that is all we have for Waterfowl 201. Here's a picture of some cute little birds, and they have unique courtship displays. So that's something we haven't chatted about today. But if you want to look up Lasian albatross courtship display or blackneck stilt courtship display, they do some pretty cute stuff. But thanks for joining us today. And we'll be on here at the same time, actually not the same time, it'll be at 11 Mountain Time next week, next Thursday, for Birding 101.
Hey, Chaley, I'm going to answer this question from Lynn. She's asking what other 1-hour classes do we offer?
Oh, cool.
We're currently doing a lot of virtual programming, as some of you might have noticed. We are offering our webinars every Thursday from 11 to 12, and we're going to keep them going into the future as much as possible. We currently also have summer camps, virtual summer camps going on that are on an hour each day. If you visit our website, which is on this slide, birdconservancy.org, and our events page, you'll see all of the classes that we offer. But we're trying to do a lot of virtual programming right now. So check out our Facebook or our website, and that should get you the resources you need. Yeah, Cornell also has some great courses as well that you can get. And I know that they're actually offering some of them for free right now. So that's a great thing to check out. All right. Thank you guys so much. If you don't have any more questions, we're going to sign off. Like Chaley said earlier, we are recording this webinar. So I will get that posted on our YouTube channel by the end of the day today. And I'm sure Chaley will be sending out a thank you to all of the registered participants. And she'll include that YouTube link as well. So you all have that YouTube link, and you can also watch some of our past webinars. We have a lot of them on our YouTube channel currently. So thank you so much, Chaley, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.